I didn't plan on walking away from her. Not really. But when she raised her eyebrow at me, just slightly, like she was measuring the temperature of my intentions, I took a step back. Then another. And before I knew it, I'd stormed out of the repair shop like someone trying to win an argument nobody else was having. I only meant to make a point. But she made a bigger one without saying a thing. It started earlier that afternoon, when I first walked into the shop. It's a cramped little place wedged between a tailor and an empty storefront that still has last year's grand opening banner peeling off the window. The air smells like dust and warm plastic, and the fluorescent lights hum in that way that makes it hard to think straight. I'd come in because my old camera wasn't working. I shoot videos, nothing serious yet, mostly practice, and that camera is the one thing I trust not to fall apart on me. Except it finally did. She stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, a pair of slim glasses resting low on her nose. Mid-40s, maybe older. Confident in the kind of way that makes you realize how chaotic you really are. I remember clearing my throat too loudly before speaking. Hi. My camera died. Again. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Let me see it. Her voice was low, steady. It made me feel like I was coming in too fast for the room. I handed the camera over, and she turned it in her hands with this deliberate grace, like every movement had been edited down to the important parts. I probably stared too long. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She raised her eyes, just a flick upward, and I looked away like an idiot. It's the sensor, she murmured. You've pushed it harder than it was meant to go. I opened my mouth, ready to defend myself, then closed it. Because she wasn't judging me. She was seeing me. More than I wanted her to, honestly. She continued unscrewing the panel, and after a moment she added, I can fix it, but maybe treat your tools with a little more kindness. She said it lightly, almost teasing, but something in me tightened anyway, like she'd tapped a nerve I didn't realize was exposed. I do treat it kindly, I said a little too quickly. She didn't argue. She just paused, then looked up at me with that raised eyebrow, the one that made everything inside me turn complicated. That's why I stepped back. And then I stepped out. And then I walked away like a dramatic idiot who definitely lost whatever point he thought he was making. I made it as far as the sidewalk before I felt stupid. The kind of stupid that's half embarrassment, half something else. Something warm and annoying. I stood outside her shop for a full minute, pretending to check a message I didn't have. Through the window, I could see her still working on my camera, calm and focused, like my small performance hadn't registered as anything more than a breeze. But then, she glanced up. Not a long look. Just a quick upward shift of her eyes, as if confirming I hadn't actually left. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers hesitated for a fraction of a second on the lens. It was nothing, except it wasn't. I don't know why that small pause, barely a heartbeat, hit me the way it did. Maybe because it felt like she knew I'd walked away for a reason I didn't understand myself. Maybe because she didn't call me back in. And maybe because, in that quiet little hesitation of hers, I felt something mirrored. I didn't go back inside. Not then. But the image of her looking up, just once, just enough, has been replaying in my head ever since. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. Or maybe I did, because I showed up at the repair shop the next morning under the excuse of checking on the camera. It wasn't ready. I knew it wouldn't be ready. But that wasn't the point, and I think I realized that halfway through pushing the door open. The shop felt different in the morning, quieter, softer, the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel personal. She was at her workbench, hair loosely tied back, a mug of coffee sitting untouched beside her. Not cold, but not fresh either. She looked tired in a way that made me slow my steps without meaning to. Morning, I said. She didn't jump. She just blinked once before turning to me. You're early. I told you it would take a day or two. I know, I said, trying not to sound like I knew exactly how stupid that made me. I just thought you might need help with something. The corner of her mouth moved. Almost a smile, almost disbelief. I've managed this place for 15 years, she said. I can probably handle one camera. I should have laughed. Instead, I shrugged like I had some dignity left. But something in my offer stayed with her, because after a moment she sighed softly and nudged a small cardboard box toward me. You can organize these batteries if you really want to make yourself useful. I took the box, grateful for something to do with my hands. She returned to her work, the quiet settling back between us, but the air felt different. Not awkward, more like aware. I watched her out of the corner of my eye while sorting batteries by size. The way her fingers moved, steady, precise. The way she leaned closer to the lamp when she needed more light. The way she kept pushing her glasses up with her knuckle instead of her hand, like she didn't want to smudge them. Little things. Stupid little things that I couldn't stop noticing. At one point she paused, shoulders lowering a little, fatigue slipping through her posture before she caught herself. She rubbed her thumb against the edge of the table, a small, almost anxious gesture, then pushed her hair behind her ear in a way that felt too deliberate to be unconscious. "You okay?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. She didn't look at me either. "I didn't sleep well," she murmured. "Nothing dramatic. Just a lot on my mind." Her voice was lower than usual. Softer. Like she wasn't used to admitting something like that out loud. I wanted to ask what she was thinking about. Instead, I lined up two batteries that weren't even the same size and pretended I was doing it on purpose. "You don't have to talk about it," I said. She finally looked over. Just a quick glance, but it lingered a breath longer than it should have. "I know," she said. Something unspoken passed between us then. Not a spark, more like a shift. A quiet recalibration of the space. A few minutes later, I carried the sorted box back to the counter. When she reached for it, her fingers brushed mine. Barely, just the slightest touch, but she froze for half a second. That hesitation, that tiny pause again. I didn't move. Neither did she. Then she pulled her hand back, slow and careful, as if the air had suddenly become fragile. "Thank you," she whispered. But the way she said it, soft, almost stolen, felt like something else entirely. I wasn't supposed to be there that late. She wasn't supposed to still be working either. But the storm outside had turned the street into a sheet of flickering reflections, and the repair shop's lights were the only ones still on. I saw the soft glow through the window on my way home, and, without thinking, I walked in. She looked up, startled at first, then relieved. Or maybe that's me trying to read too much into a tiny exhale. "You shouldn't be walking around in this weather," she said, not scolding, just tired. "And you shouldn't be working in it," I replied, shaking raindrops from my jacket. She huffed a short, amused breath, half laugh, half sigh, and gestured toward the back of the shop. "Power's flickering. I need to finish this before it cuts again." I followed her to the small workroom where the hum of the storm felt closer, as if the walls weren't trying very hard to keep it out. The lamp on her desk cast a warm circle of light. Everything outside it swallowed in shadow. The camera, my camera, lay open in front of her, delicate parts exposed like a secret she was carefully undoing. "Sit," she murmured, nudging a stool with her foot. "You look like you need it." I sat, and for a long few seconds, neither of us spoke. The storm rattled the window. She tightened a tiny screw with steady fingers. I watched her hands again, too closely probably. At one point she stopped working. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just paused. Her hands hovered over the lens, her shoulders subtly sinking as if the weight of something invisible had slipped onto them. "You ever get tired of being strong all the time?" she asked quietly. The question wasn't meant for me. It wasn't meant for anyone. It just slipped out, the way truths sometimes do when we think no one is listening. I swallowed. "You don't always have to be." She closed her eyes. Just briefly. A tiny tremor went through her breath before she steadied it. "I don't know how to be anything else," she said. There it was, the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. Not a collapse, not a confession, just a single crack in the armor. And it did something to me. I shifted closer without meaning to, the stool scraping lightly against the floor. She didn't pull away. Her elbow brushed my sleeve, accidentally, but she didn't move it right away. The closeness felt dangerous, not because of what might happen, but because of what almost could. Then her phone buzzed. A name flashed across the screen. Daniel. She didn't pick it up, but her jaw tightened in that way I'd only seen once, when she talked about the camera being pushed too hard. "Should I step out?" I asked. "No." She answered too quickly, then softened. "No. It's fine. But she didn't silence the phone. She just stared at the screen until it stopped vibrating, her fingers curling slightly at her side. I wanted to ask who he was. I didn't. Instead, I reached toward the lamp to steady it when the power flickered again. My hand brushed hers. Barely a touch, barely a moment. But it felt like something shifted in the air, sharp and fragile. She looked at me then. Really looked. The kind of look that felt like it was deciding something. I almost said her name. She almost leaned in. And then, the power cut, plunging us into darkness just as something unspoken hovered between us, waiting to happen. The lights came back in pieces. First a weak flicker, then a stronger one, then the lamp buzzing itself awake, its glow cutting a thin line through the dim room. She didn't move. Neither did I. We were still standing too close, closer than either of us had any right to be. My hand was still half lifted from when the power cut. Hers hovered near mine, like she hadn't decided if she should pull back or stay exactly where she was. When she finally stepped away, it wasn't far, just enough to breathe again. She rubbed her thumb against the edge of the workbench, slow, deliberate, grounding herself. "This is getting complicated," she murmured. She didn't say between us. She didn't have to. I swallowed, trying to find the right sentence and failing at every attempt. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't," she said too quickly, then shook her head, frustrated with herself. "It's not that. It's," she trailed off, eyes lowering to the open camera on the table as if she could hide inside the circuitry. Silence stretched. Not awkward, heavy. A silence that pulled instead of pushed. "What are we doing?" she finally whispered. Her voice wasn't sharp or angry. It was tired, confused, like she was asking herself more than me. I waited, because she looked like she needed space to finish the thought. But she didn't continue. She just stood there, back straight, jaw tight, pretending she wasn't unraveling thread by thread. "I don't know," I said finally. "But something's happening." The words felt dangerous the second I let them out. Her eyes lifted. Not wide, not startled, just honest, raw, in a way she'd never let herself be until now. "You're too young to get tangled in someone else's unfinished story," she said. "Maybe." My fingers tapped the stool's edge, nervous, restless. "But I'm already tangled, so that advice is a little late." She exhaled through her nose, a shaky thing she tried to hide. "You shouldn't say things like that." "I didn't mean to. It just came out." "Exactly," she whispered. "That's the problem. This," she gestured vaguely between us. "This isn't supposed to feel charged." The word hung there, trembling between our breaths. "I didn't plan any of this," I said. "Neither did I." The storm outside softened, but inside the room everything felt sharper. Her fingers toyed with the camera screws like she needed something solid to anchor her. I noticed how her shoulders pressed back against the tension, how she stared at the table instead of me, how her breath kept catching like she wanted to say something she already regretted thinking. Then, quietly, "I don't know why I let you stay tonight." My throat tightened. "Do you want me to leave?" She didn't answer. She just looked at me, long, searching, almost pained. "You make the room feel different," she whispered. "Too different." I stepped closer without touching her, letting the closeness ask what my words couldn't. "Is that a bad thing?" Her lips parted slightly, not to speak, but because she'd forgotten to breathe for a second. "It's a terrifying thing," she said. And the way she said terrifying felt like the closest thing to truth she'd given me yet. The storm had passed by the time I came back the next day, but something heavier than rain sat in the air. The shop was quiet, too quiet, and when I pushed the door open, she wasn't at the front counter like usual. I found her in the back room, sitting on the small metal stool she never actually sat on. Shoulders drawn in, elbows resting on her knees, fingers pressed against her forehead like she was holding something together by force. My instinct was to step back out, pretend I hadn't seen anything. But she lifted her head the moment the door creaked. "You're early," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. The edges of them were raw in that way you only see after someone has fought with their own memories. I hesitated. "I can come back." "No," she said, shaking her head too quickly. "Stay? Please." That please lingered in the room, unsure where to settle. I sat across from her on a crate. close enough to see the faint tremor in her hands. She noticed me looking and curled her fingers into her palms, hiding the shake. "What happened?" I asked softly. She reached into the small drawer beside her and pulled out her phone. Not to show me something. At first, anyway. She just held it, thumb pressing against the screen like she was afraid of what was on it. Then she turned it around. A voicemail notification. Timestamp, 1:12 a.m. Sender. "Dad, I didn't listen to it until this morning," she said. "I don't usually listen to them at all." I frowned. "Is he okay?" A faint, humorless smile tugged at her mouth. "He's been gone for 9 years. My breath caught. Then the voicemail. She nodded slowly. "Old messages. Ones I never deleted." She tapped the screen. The voicemail began to play, quiet, muffled, a man's warm voice threading through the tiny speaker. "Just checking in. I know you're working late again. Get some rest, okay? You don't have to carry everything alone." Her eyes dropped as the message crackled to an end. "I don't know why I played it today," she whispered. "I was looking for something else, and it just opened." Silence wrapped around us again. Not the charged kind from before. This one was tender, fragile. I leaned forward. "You miss him." She let out a breath that shook at the end. He was the one person who... Her voice broke, just enough to make her stop. She tried again. "He understood me before I understood myself." I nodded. Not because I knew what to say, but because anything louder would have felt wrong. She looked at me then. Really looked. Eyes glossy, but not falling apart. "You remind me of him. Not the age. Not who you are. Just the way you..." She gestured at me helplessly. "You listen. You show up. You care without asking if you should." I swallowed, the words landing deeper than I expected. "I didn't know," I murmured. "I didn't want you to know," she said. "Not yet. A beat. Not ever, maybe." Her fingers brushed the phone screen. Then she set it face down like it burned. The room felt suddenly smaller. Not suffocating, closer. Like a secret had been laid between us, warm and humming. She wiped beneath one eye with her thumb, not quite hiding it. "Can we just not talk for a minute?" she whispered. So I didn't. I just sat there, breathing in rhythm with her, letting the quiet settle around us. And somewhere in that silence, gentle, trembling, honest, we crossed a line we still hadn't named, but both of us felt shifting under our feet. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Her sitting on the stool, me on the crate, the voicemail still ghosting the air even though it had stopped minutes ago. Long enough for the late afternoon light to soften into something golden. Long enough for the dust motes to settle instead of drift. She wasn't crying. Not exactly. But her breath was thin around the edges, like she was trying to hold everything in place, and the effort was wearing her down. At some point, she straightened. Not fully, just enough to look like she was preparing to put the mask back on. I think she felt me watching her, because she whispered, "Don't look at me like that." "Like what?" I asked. "Like I'm breakable." "You're not," I said. "You're just tired." Her lips pressed together, not disagreeing. Not agreeing either. Just absorbing it. She folded her hands, fingertips tapping against each other. It was the first time I realized how often she relied on her hands to speak when her voice wouldn't. "You shouldn't get attached to me," she said softly. Not a warning. A confession. People don't usually stay. I'm here, aren't I? That's what scares me. I shifted, elbows resting on my knees. "I'm not trying to save you. I'm just here. That's all." She gave a breath of something like a laugh, but gentler, threaded with something new. "You make it sound simple." I think maybe it is. A silence settled again, but this one felt different, warmer, full of something unfolding slowly, carefully, like we both understood time had stopped arguing with us. "I don't want to hurt you," she whispered. "You won't. You don't know that. I don't need to know. I'm still here." She closed her eyes, and for the first time since I met her, she didn't fight whatever she was feeling. Her shoulders dropped. Her jaw loosened. A kind of surrender, but not the painful kind. More like she was finally letting herself be held up by something other than her own strength. Without thinking, I reached out and rested my hand on the table beside her. Not touching, just close. An invitation that could be ignored without consequence. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, deliberately, quietly, She placed her hand next to mine, her fingers brushing the back of my hand. Not holding, not gripping, just resting there. The smallest touch. The one that said everything we weren't going to say out loud. I don't know what this is, she murmured. Me neither, I admitted. But it doesn't feel wrong. She turned her head, meeting my eyes. The truth passing between us wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even fully formed. But it was real. A soft shift. A quiet collapse. Two people leaning closer because stepping back no longer made sense. She moved her hand just slightly, enough for her fingers to align with mine. Not interlaced, just parallel. A choice. A permission. A beginning. The kind you don't speak about. The kind you feel. We'll figure it out, I said. Her lips curved. Not a smile, not an answer, but something patient and steady. Stay for a while, she whispered. And without needing to think, I did. I think about that night more often than I admit. Not because it was dramatic or cinematic or any of the things stories pretend love is made of, but because it was quiet and real and ours. Back then, I didn't understand how rare it is for two people to meet in the middle of their own brokenness and decide, without announcing it, that they won't run this time. I was still learning what it meant to show up for someone without expecting them to collapse into my arms. She was still learning that letting someone into her space didn't mean losing control. I look back now, and I see the shift. Not in the moment she touched my hand, though that felt like the world holding its breath. Not in the late-night storms, or the pauses, or the half-sentences. It was the morning after. She made coffee the way she always did, too strong, no sugar, and handed me a mug without asking if I wanted one. She didn't look at me right away. She was stirring her own cup with the slow, distracted movement of someone still adjusting to a new idea. When she finally lifted her eyes, it wasn't dramatic. She didn't smile or blush or glance away. She just looked, like she was allowing herself to see me in a way she hadn't let herself before. That's when I knew something had changed, not just between us, but in us. For her, it was the first time she wasn't carrying everything alone. For me, it was the first time I realized that love isn't about rushing toward a finish line. It's about staying when everything around you says you shouldn't bother. We didn't dive headfirst into anything. We didn't label it. We didn't make promises we weren't ready to understand. We just kept showing up. Some days she was guarded. Some days I was unsure. Some days the air between us felt so charged that even standing too close felt like a question neither of us wanted to answer yet. But there was honesty, small, steady, imperfect honesty. And that became our anchor. Looking back, I see how much of myself I grew into with her. I learned patience, not the passive kind, but the kind that listens for the truth someone doesn't know how to say. I learned that strength isn't loud. I learned that age doesn't decide who understands you. Presence does. And she learned how to let someone hold the quiet with her. How to lean, just a little. How to let the walls loosen without fear they'd crumble. People like to talk about love as if it's some wild, sweeping force. But the moment that changed everything for us was nothing more than two hands resting side by side, choosing not to pull away. I still think about that. How something so small can leave an echo that lasts. So if you're listening to this and some part of it hit a little too close, if something in you softened, cracked, remembered, or felt seen, if this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?